What a great piece, choir. Thank you. And a perfect piece to introduce this sermon this morning. Let me just say that I think that, I don't know, I won't speak for you, but for me, the biggest challenge this time of the year is slowing down enough so that I don't miss the season. And for me, nothing would be more important than being here at 5 o'clock. This chancel will be overflowing with choirs from the little tiny ones to the big ones. Y'all gonna go rehearse some more, that's great. And full orchestra tonight. 5 o'clock to 6 o'clock, it's 1 hour. It's a no-miss event. If you have a ball game you need to see at 5 o'clock this afternoon, that's why God invented those TV recorders. Okay, we're continuing this series on Mary. We're following the nativity story, the birth of Jesus, through the journey of Mary. Today we get to the part that really is about Mary's journey from the little town of Nazareth to Bethlehem, and we're going to read the first 6 verses of Luke's 2nd chapter. In those days, Caesar Augustus issued a decree that a census should be taken of the entire Roman world. Guess what that's all about? Can anybody have any guess? Why would you take a census? Taxes, right? Got to get the IRS up to speed. So this was the first census that took place while Quirinius was governor of Syria. And everyone went to their own town to register. So Joseph also went up from the town of Nazareth in Galilee to Judea, to Bethlehem, the town of David, because he belonged to the house and lineage of David. He went there to register with Mary, who was pledged to be married to him and was expecting a child. And while they were there, the time came for the baby to be born. We're going to stop it right there because the next phrase is saved for next week. It's the actual birth of the baby Jesus. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. I think most of us think most of the time when we open the Bible, either Old Testament or New Testament, we're reading about what it is that God does in the world. We're reading about God's plans for us. We're reading about what God has done to bring salvation to the world. But the reality is, and you check this out the next time you open your Old or New Testament, the reality is that most of the time when we open the Bible, we're reading about what human beings are planning and doing. Most of the Bible is just about ordinary, everyday, daily life. And such is the case with 5 of these 6 verses. You open the 2nd chapter of Luke and you find out that Caesar, here's the backstory. Caesar, as you know, is ambitious. Caesar wants more money. Caesar wants more wealth in the coffers. Caesar wants to enrich the kingdom. Caesar wants to expand his power. So he says, well, let's get in some more taxes. Let's make sure that everybody is paying their fair share of taxes, right? We hear a lot about taxes these days. That's what this is about. So he sends out this decree. It's his plan. Send out this decree, make everybody register for their taxes. And then we find Joseph. We're not sure how Joseph was, a lot older than Mary. But Joseph, who was of the house and lineage of David, we're told, from Bethlehem, he says, I got to go down to Bethlehem in order to register. That's my place of birth. And so he begins to make plans. These are very, very human plans. Joseph, he is engaged to Mary. She's pregnant. So Joseph, he does what all of us do when you get ready for a journey. He gets out his Google Maps and he plots where he is now and where he's going to be. Scholars tell us that the trip from Nazareth to Bethlehem is maybe 10 hours by foot. I've made that trip by vehicle. It's not that far, but I guess back in that day, maybe as many as 10 hours? 10 days, a 10-day trip. So Joseph makes his plans. He plots the places where they're going to stay. He puts on his map a little mark. Every place there's a McDonald's, clean restrooms and all of that. Just exactly the way you plan your trips, right? He goes down to the Avis, rent a donkey. I thought that was pretty cute. I don't know. Avis, rent a donkey, gets the best donkey he can find because Mary is 9 months pregnant. He does everything, but he forgets about one thing. You remember what it was he forgets about? It's in the very next verse. He forgets about the reservations at the Holiday Inn. I don't know about you, but my mind, I can get a little wild when I start imagining these scenes. I would like to have been there at the Holiday Inn there in Bethlehem when they walk in, he gets ready to check in, and they realize he had no reservations. Can you imagine Mary's reaction? Are you kidding me? You forgot I'm 9 months pregnant and you forgot the reservations? It happened to me one time. Amarillo, Texas. We ended up staying in a motel that was so dirty that my wife refused to take off her clothes. And I don't know what it is about Amarillo, but 2 other families have come out this morning after I've told that story, and they had I think they must have stayed in the same place. A friend of mine said, we got up at 5 o'clock in the morning and left because we couldn't stand it any longer. But anyway, everybody's making their plans on this until you get to the 6th verse. And all of a sudden, it's not about human plans. It's about God's plans. This one phrase, and the time came. And the time came. That wasn't about what humans do. That was about what God does. There's this great concept that comes to us out of Greek culture and language. We've talked about it before. In the Greek language, there are 2 words for what our English word would be for time. One is chronos. It's spelled Chronos. And chronos means time in the way that you and I measure it. It's human time. I don't know about you, but I'm kind of a nut. I always want to be on time. The first day of every month, I set my time to the atomic, the atomic Navy time, I always like to say. My watch is within 4 seconds of being absolutely accurate at all times. That's chronos. We worry about chronos, being human time. But the other Greek word for time is an extraordinary and powerful word. It is kairos. Kairos. And kairos means the appropriate time, or the abundant time, or the right time. In the life of the church, for those of us who follow Jesus, kairos means God's time. God's time. And so a lot of you know about this. You've experienced this. You've carried babies. I meet women around here all the time, and they're carrying a baby in them. And I'll say, well, when are you due? And they'll say, well, I'm due on the 31st of December. And I always say, well, it really doesn't make any difference because it's not up to you, it's up to God. It'll always be a matter of kairos. When is God's time for this human life to enter into the world? And so that's what happens. And in the midst of all of these human plans, some of them good, some of them bad, some of them fallible, some of them, right on target. In the midst of all of this human planning, we find God appearing. Kairos, it's God's time. And the time came for this baby to be born. And so 2 things real quickly that I want you to understand about this particular story. The first is this: the most important things in life are almost always the things that we do not plan. It's hard for us to think about that because the truth of the matter is we like to plan our lives. We like to do things our own way. We like to be in control of life. But I guarantee you, if you'll stop and think about your own life, you will come to the conclusion that the most important things that have happened in your life have always been things that you did not plan. I'll give you just one example, and this has happened to a lot of you. You graduate from college, you've got a pretty good degree, you make an application with a mid-sized corporation. It's really a great company. You really want that job. You nail the interview, you get the job, and you begin the climb through the corporation towards the top. And you get promotion after promotion and raise after raise, and you find yourself at age 47 or 48 or 51, and you're sitting in your office one day and you think, wow, this has been pretty good. I'm making a lot of money, I've been really successful, and I've got upward mobility. Things are just going to get better and better from this point on. And you allow yourself for just a moment to be seduced by the thought that maybe you'll get close to the C-suite. And then one morning you go to work, it's Monday morning, you get there early, and almost immediately your boss calls you into her office. She says, sit down. This isn't public yet, nobody knows it, but they're going to announce it at noon. Over the weekend, we were merged, we've been bought out. There's going to be a reduction in force. I'm sorry, but this is your last day working for this company. That's happened to you, hasn't it? Or to somebody you know or love, or some scenario like that. Your life has been changed forever, and it wasn't in your plan at all. You're sitting around talking about Christmas Eve. Who's going to make the pecan pie on Christmas Eve? Who's going to take care of the decorations on Christmas Day? And all of a sudden the phone rings, and these words on the other end, there's been an accident. And life is never again the same. All these people in California, do you suppose that a year ago they were sitting around thinking, we need to make plans in case there's a wildfire in a year, and in case it comes blowing through our neighborhood and reduces our home to ashes? We need to be making plans. I guarantee you, the things that change life for you and me are things that we do not plan. And so the most difficult part of the journey for you and me, we make those plans, we get onto the journey. The most difficult part of the journey for you and me is learning how to say thank you, God, in all circumstances. That's what Paul said, isn't it? In one of his letters, Paul writes, in all circumstances, give thanks. Here we are, maybe 2 or 3 weeks out of Thanksgiving, and Thanksgiving isn't technically a religious holiday, but you and I know that it is an extraordinarily spiritual holiday if you are a Christian. And Thanksgiving is so easy if things are going well, and all you have to do is say, thank you, God, for the big house and the fact that we've got plenty of food and plenty of clothing and everything's well, and maybe the Cowboys will even win. But saying Thanksgiving in all circumstances gets tough when you've lost your job, or when the wildfires come through, or the bad news. And yet, isn't that what this extraordinary woman did? This woman we refer to as Mary, who teaches us the meaning of Christmas. You see, I think the problem is that most of us, when we talk about the spiritual journey, and we do that a lot around here, we talk about the spiritual journey. Kathy Sweeney, Kathy Sweeney's up here. I couldn't remember whether you were up here or not. Kathy Sweeney's up here. In January, she's going to roll out some great new programs to help people with the spiritual journey, with Bible reading and prayer, contemplative prayer, the discipline of leading a spiritual life, an examined life on a regular basis. All of that's part of our spiritual journey. But the problem is that we start thinking, and I think I'm responsible for this, we start thinking that somehow we have this regular journey that we're on, this human journey that we're on, and then we have this spiritual journey, that they're 2 different things, that we engage in the spiritual journey to try to help with our ordinary journey. Christmas tells us that the spiritual journey is the journey. It is our journey. That God is present in all of the ordinary things that happen to us in life. And that's what Mary tells us. In the Christmas narrative in Matthew, you know what Matthew tells us? They say his name will be called Emmanuel, which means God with us. That really is the meaning of Christmas, that God is with us amidst all of the ordinariness of life, that God will be with us when comes the reduction in force, that God is with us when the fires rage through life, that God is with us during the diagnosis of illness, that God is with us when the phone call with bad news comes. The spiritual journey is what you and I are on, whether we like it or not. And Mary teaches us this remarkable skill, this faith, this commitment, because in her journey, she always sees God. She always hears God. She always experiences God. And so Mary always says, thank you, God. Thank you, God. That little joke I made earlier about, Mary at the Holiday Inn, turning to Joseph, and what do you mean you didn't make reservations? That didn't really happen. I mean, you and I know, we already know that didn't happen, don't we? Because this is the same Mary who, on an ordinary day, 9 months earlier, entertained the visitation of an angel that called himself Gabriel, who said, Mary, you're going to have a child, ready or not, married or not, you're going to have a child. And she said, thank you, God. Let it be with me according to your will. This is the same Mary who, when Joseph said, well, we've got to go down to Bethlehem and register, she didn't say, but I'm 9 months pregnant. She just said, okay. It's not what I had planned for life. It's not where I planned to have my baby, but thank you, God. And so we already know that when they were standing there in the lobby of the Holiday Inn and he said, we don't have any rooms here. She said, it's okay. We'll go out to the stable in the back. We're glad to have a place to have a baby. Thank you, God. This is the Mary who teaches us the meaning of Christmas, that God is always with us in the good times and the bad times and the ordinary times, who always says, thank you, God. If only you and I could be more like Mary.